Welcome to The Point. I'm your host, Cenk Uygur, and guess what kind of show we have for you guys today? An awesome one. So here are the 3 points. First of all, Dr. George Lakoff is professor of linguistics, and he talks about framing and democratic messaging. Do they bungle it time and time again, and should they do it differently? I love that. I can't wait to get to that. And then we've got a point sent in by Seth Kay, who is a University of Virginia student activist, about the ouster of the president of the University of Virginia. The board apparently wanted to go in a more for-profit direction. Does that make sense for schools? The answer is no, but nonetheless, we will debate it. And our final point is about the trivialities of the campaigns. Why does the mainstream media discuss the trivial nonsense so much? I have an excellent answer. Don't you want to hear it? All right, hang right there. All right, now look at our panelists. Jesus, Lord mercy. Jill Clausen is a political consultant. She's worked with Jane Harman, Patrick Kennedy. She was a delegate to the California Democratic Party from 2010 to 2011, founder of the Winning Words Project. Wait a minute, that's going to help us with the messaging segment. All right, Lee Camp is a political comedian and activist, famous for going on Fox News and kicking ass. He's also got a web series called Moment of Clarity and a comedy album out called Pepper Spray the Tears Away. Lee, that doesn't make any sense. You would get more tears. Jesus. Okay. All right. Lynn Vavrick is an associate professor of political science and communication studies at UCLA and author of The Message Matters, The Economy and Presidential Campaigns. I get it. You guys are relevant to the panel. Okay, right. So, first point from Professor George Lakoff is about messaging and whether Democrats get it right or whether they should change their messaging. Let's watch.
Hi, I'm George Lakoff. I'm a professor at the University of California at Berkeley in cognitive science and linguistics. I study the relationship between the brain, the mind, and language. And I have a very simple point. The worst thing that progressives can do is to quote conservative language, even to negate it. Remember when Nixon said, "I am not a crook," everyone thought of him as a crook. If you give conservative talking points and then try to argue against them, people hear the conservative talking points and it affects their brains and it strengthens those ideas in their brains. What you need to do instead is talk morally. All politics is moral. Everybody who gives a proposal, any politician, says it because it's right, not because it's wrong or doesn't matter. You need to give the moral principles behind what you're saying, and you need to say something positive, some deep truth that undermines conservatism. For example, our democracy is based on a simple moral principle, that citizens care about each other and act on that care by being both personally and socially responsible, and by what Obama has called the principle of excellence, that is, doing the best for yourself, your family, your country, and so on. That is carried out by the government through the concept of the public. What the public does is provide stuff for everyone that everyone needs: roads, bridges, public buildings, communication systems, transportation systems, public education, public health, sewers. No company can function without this. Nobody makes it on their own, and you can't even have a decent private life without it. If you want a slogan, it's simple. The private depends upon the public, always. If you want to know more, here's a book for you to read by myself and Elizabeth Veiling. It's called The Little Blue Book, The Essential Guide to Thinking and Talking Democratic.
Well, there's 2 parts to that point that I loved. First, the point about Nixon, I am not a crook, where everybody immediately thinks you're a crook. And point number 2 is that apparently Professor Lakoff filmed that from heaven.
Like, it was a lovely set.
Right, wasn't it? I was like, geez, I want to hang out where he's filming that. God, that looked beautiful.
I almost want to buy like 10 of those books and bathe in them.
But you know what? That was good framing. Yes, I mean, you want to talk about framing, right? You did it perfectly in that video in that sense. Yes. So Jill, look, this is, you do this for a living in a sense. And so talk to me about Democrats versus Republicans on framing. Are the Republicans usually kicking their ass?
They're always, well, almost always kicking our ass. They have better winning words than we do, and we need to get back to the basics and remind Americans who we are and what we stand for, and stop trying to talk about policy minutia. Dr. Lakoff is correct. We need to talk about moral values. But another way to put that is to speak to people's hearts. instead of to their heads, because when they follow their hearts, their heads will follow after. We don't fall in love with people because they look good on paper, even though they might look perfect on paper. We fall in love with them because they make us feel something. And so our messaging should be making people feel something, not just telling people this is what it's going to do.
Yeah, you know, I think that's the central message of what Professor Lakoff's talking about, that we're not in an age of reason. Like, if I win the argument logically, hence the voters will vote for me. You know, Lynn, do you agree with that? That so much of how the voters decide who to vote for is emotional?
I don't agree with that at all.
Oh, really? Now we're having fun.
Not
Go.
at all.
Oh, I love this.
I think that you have to remember that Obama did stir up a lot of emotion in 2008. So he's good at this. He's the same guy he was. So he didn't become bad at it over the last 4 years. But more importantly, if you look at what drives presidential election outcomes, it's almost always the state of the nation's economy. And this is going to be close, but the economy is growing. And I know people are going to want to say, oh, but jobs haven't come back. But the predictor that does the best job is change in growth. So GDP change in the first 6 months of the election year. And that's going to favor Obama. And that will play a large role.
Well, you know, Lynn, I love that you lived up to your the Maverick name that we've come up with you in going in the other direction. But look, let me disagree with that in a couple of ways. So first, let me agree with you that hope and change was great framing in 2008.
It's brilliant.
Yeah,
Perfect.
I mean, change to what? I don't know. I'm not going to tell you, right? But didn't you hate Bush? Yeah, change. All right, I'm in, right? So brilliant job of framing in that sense, right? And I think that in a lot of ways he's framing this election right too. We can get back to that in a second. But in the long run, here's my disagreement. Democrats always feed into the Republican frame. Even President Obama, the first 3.5 years, that's all he's done is, I can out-tax cut them. My tax cut goes to the middle class. Right. Tax cuts are awesome. I did a payroll tax cut. But wait a minute, you just fed into the biggest Republican frame there is, which is if you want to revive the economy, you always go with tax cuts, which, by the way, isn't even true.
Last election, it was hope and change. This time, it's going to be, no, I really mean it this time. But I think the problem is that so many Democrats are still, they're corporate Democrats, so they don't appeal. They should be appealing to people's sense of common good and people's empathy and people's caring for each other. But I think too many of them are still profiting so heavily from this career path that they have that that's not what they're speaking to.
And Lee is exactly right. And Lynn is certainly correct that the economy does always drive presidential elections. But the economy won't matter if people don't care about what you have to say. And as much as I love President Obama, and he is an amazing orator, I think that he has gotten a little bit bad at messaging. Because like you said, he focuses so much on tax cuts, tax cuts, tax cuts. And we need to get back to the basics and use the winning words that our founders used. You know, Benjamin Franklin actually said of people who didn't want to pay what he called their club, that they didn't belong in a civilized society and they should go live with the savages. Taxes are our nation's income. It's how we make our money. When we go to work for you, building roads and bridges, we need income to do that. We provide work as a government. We want to get paid for that.
I think you're entirely right, but it goes to Lee's point, which is that the problem isn't that President Obama is framing the tax cuts wrong. The problem is he believes in the tax cuts. He's a Republican. And that's, Republican is too strong a word, but he's center-right. He believes in tax cuts. That's why he keeps fluffing them up.
And I'm going to tell you why he believes in tax cuts, because they've been repeated over and over and over and over, and it is the point of why it's so dangerous to continually repeat the right-wing frames, because we come to believe them ourselves.
And he did a principle, like a problem that Professor Lakoff talks about, is that in that healthcare, after the Supreme Court rules, he comes out and does a little speech on healthcare, and he said, look, this is not a radical proposal. Which makes you think, wait, is it a radical proposal? Right? All right, so Lynn, go ahead.
A small reality check. I just want to say, like, words are fantastic, and I'm a big fan of framing and messaging. But I think the thing that you really have to also pay attention to is reality. And so you cannot, as a candidate, go out there with the right winning words and create a reality that doesn't exist.
Correct.
People are smarter than that.
Absolutely.
And so what is hard for Barack Obama right now on this tax cuts question is the economy is not recovering fast enough. People do not have jobs. They don't have enough money in their pocket. They can't feed their children. And so he's in this reality where he cannot say, I'm not going to cut your taxes. In fact, we have to pay more because we have more demand and we are morally obligated to help our fellow citizens. He can't say that. He will lose. So
But I think
Lynn, I'm sorry, I got to step in. I so deeply agree and deeply disagree with you at the same time.
I love that.
So, right. So now, here's the part I said I agree with. So George Bush kept saying, we're making progress about Iraq. And finally people are like, what the hell is this guy talking about? We're not making progress. We're getting killed out there, right? So you're right. At some point, you run into reality, and it's a brick wall.
But how many people still believe there were WMD? Still, to this day.
To this day. In fact, I know the number. 63% of Republicans still believe Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass
destruction.
destruction.
You can just make up reality.
So that's partly true. And look at how he framed it in 2004 in an election. Iraq's already a disaster, and he says, well, since we've got a disastrous war, you can't switch horses in midstream. And that's brilliant, and it worked.
There are Democrats who, Madeleine Albright was right there. I mean, there are Democrats who believe this too. So I think this is a classic example to go to, the WMD example. But that one is complicated. The reality there, I think, was a little bit up for grabs.
Okay, and look at how you frame reality too. Sorry, I'm talking so much, but look on the pre-existing conditions in healthcare, right? So healthcare is bad. Oh my God, Mandy. But wait a minute. If you switch the conversation to pre-existing conditions, 85% of Americans say, I want you to cover pre-existing conditions.
Right.
And then you could pound them with it and frame it as something positive rather than defending turf that is negative.
The right wing is so good at pinpointing fear and like your selfish issues and your fear, whereas the left wing gets caught up in nuance, which I love nuance when I'm having a discussion around a coffee table. But when you're making these points, it's got to be. America has the attention span of a mongoose on meth. Like it's got to be like to the point, and they don't get it.
Right, and Democrats did a really wonderful thing by naming this bill the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. And then they punted the values-based part of the name to go with the wonky financial part. Now, I understand we were in the middle of a financial crisis in the country, and they were hoping that frame would work. But you know, when you find out that it's not working, that people want to know how you're going to be protecting their insurance because Republicans are now telling you that you're going to destroy their insurance, go with the right name. It's the Patient Protection Act. And the Patient Protection Act are the winning words because they frame it around what the bill is actually going to do. And instead of that, Nancy Pelosi says, you're going to have to wait until it's passed before you can find out what's in it, and we become the laughing stock.
It doesn't matter what they called it. This is a great example of framing. What it has become known as is Obamacare.
Right.
So they could have called it whatever they wanted.
But
right?
you know, Republicans might have screwed up on that because I believe if the Democrats play it right, they will emphasize things like pre-existing conditions and how they're going to cover. And if you do a repeal, okay, so you don't want your pre-existing condition covered? Okay, repeal it. You know, women pay more than men do for health care coverage on average, significantly so. In Chicago, for example, 31%. So if women, you want to pay more, all right, then you repeal it. So Obamacare might actually one day turn into a positive word, so that might be, in the long run, possibly a screw up.
Yeah, I think that's
for
an
them.
interesting framing issue because Obamacare, I think they did it that way because they thought that they would be able to paint healthcare so horrible and he would be linked to it because it's in the name. It's him in the name. However, I think if it starts to look like it's working out and you end up with Obama and care in the same thing and people are thinking Obama cares.
That's another great point. I hadn't even thought of it that way.
And here's how we're going to make it work out. We choose the words that frame it the way we want people to understand it. The Patient Protection Act. Obamacare protects patients. That's why we call it the Patient Protection Act. It protects you from being kicked off your insurance when you get sick.
Right. Yep.
And you know how we know that those are good winning words? Because Eric Cantor is trotting them out now. We need to start becoming patient-centered.
Right.
And we need to abandon Obamacare and start being more patient-centered, except that we have the most patient-centered law on the books now, affirmed by the Supreme Court of the United States of America, and it's the Patient Protection Act.
Right. Now, last thing on this, and by the way, Democrats don't always screw it up. War on women is great framing.
Brilliant.
Oh, they're clobbering the Republicans with the war on women, if you ask me.
Yeah.
Okay, now, And so the last part is Republicans don't always get it right either, right? So whether it's Obamacare and that jury's still out on that. First, sometimes they do goofy things like the Democrat Party instead of the Democratic Party because it ends in rat. Like, I don't know. That to me, that feels like you're a child. I mean, everybody knows this Democratic Party, and you have like their presidential candidates, like a third grader, like, oh, that's the Democrat Party. To me, you feel like a loser.
You know, there was that leaked thing where Frank Luntz was speaking to a group of governors, and he said Occupy Wall Street scared the hell out of him. And I think it's because the framing of Occupy was and is so good, like the 99% and the 1% and the wealth inequality. Like, it was very simple, and people understood it. And I think this is Frank Luntz saying he scared the hell out of him. That's not a guy who scares easily. So.
Yeah, and you know what's amazing in that memo, that in that presentation he did to Republican governors? He said, let's stop using the word capitalism. It isn't playing well.
Right.
And I thought, wow, that goes to your point, Lynn. At some point, you run into a brick wall of reality, and people are saying, hey, this system isn't working for the average guy. So if you want to call it capitalism, then I'm not sure I'm in favor of it. And that's a moment I thought we would never get to in the United States of America. All right, so interesting discussion. Now, when we come back, we will talk about the University of Virginia. They had ousted their president, but then they brought her back. Why? We'll discuss when we come back. The University of Virginia ousted their president, Teresa Sullivan. It was an amazing Machiavellian move by their rector, Dragus. What is this, a comic book? What
Sounds
is
evil.
I know, right? So then it turns out Sullivan did a power play on her by rallying the whole campus on her side, and she won. She came back. Actually, we've got a point from a recent UVA grad, Seth K., who's going to tell us what happened there and his take on it. Let's watch.
Hey TYT Nation, Seth K. here, recent UVA computer science grad and new media director for the Living Wage campaign. My point is that the corporate university needs to change. When I read Rector Dragus' email that President Sullivan had resigned, I was shocked. I thought, OMG, did the Living Wage hunger strike just take out the president? The vacuous press conference left room for conspiracy and speculation. Could Sullivan's support for Living Wage in her textbook have been the philosophical difference with the board? Rumors spread about cutting obscure departments like classics in German. Darden business alum, hedge fund billionaire, and Goldman Sachs partner Peter Kiernan resigned after a complicit reply-all email. We were clueless as to why all this was happening until the Cab Daily scooped the national papers by FOIA-ing Dragus' emails, revealing that she and Visitor Kington believed Sullivan had pedestrian views of online education and lacked strategic dynamism, whatever the heck that is. Wahoos love their good old UVA. 17,000 of us united for honor on Facebook. UVA trended on Twitter. The Faculty Senate voted no confidence in the rector and called for Sullivan's reinstatement, and the deans of the colleges concurred. 3,000 rallied for Sullivan until the Board of Visitors picked an interim president at 3 a.m. And Dragus told us, don't believe what you read in the papers. Except that she did. Dragus and Kington believed every single op-ed they saw in the Wall Street Journal and Chronicle of Higher Ed about online education. And who did they pick to replace Sullivan? The undergrad business dean, Zeithamel, whose expertise is strategy. And yet, Sullivan was told explicitly not to do a strategic overhaul. But she outlined the major issues affecting higher ed in a strategy memo anyway. Never once does Dragus say that Sullivan was incapable of handling these issues. My media studies professor, Siva Vaidyanathan, points out that these massively online courses, MOOCs, don't actually make any money, and they're not good for learning in most cases. I hope this fiasco sparks important conversations about the corporate governance and privatization. Mr. Jefferson's vision was for the University of Virginia to be the public school in the nation. The Board of Visitors needs to be restructured. Public education needs proper funding. The University of Virginia should be more than a credentialing system. Make the stamp of privilege the UVA degree provides mean something. Wahoo-wah, and that's my point.
All right, Lee, you're a proud UVA alum, so this important question goes to you. Is Rector Dragus on the side of the Penguin or the Joker?
Which one? Maybe the Riddler. But no, she's absolutely what's the word? Evil, and it just speaks to the corporate takeover of multiple parts of our society. And I'm so proud of the kids there for standing up against this, because I think this speaks to a larger issue that the country's dealing with people who are tired of greed over good and profitable pollution over people and just all this and seeing those kids stand up. It was amazing for me because when I was there, nobody stood up for anything. The largest protest was when the corner store stopped carrying Playboys. So this is huge.
Well, that sounds pretty disastrous.
Well, okay. It was. Yeah, it was.
All right. I hear you. So, I'm trying to figure out what the hell's going on here. I think as a lot of people at UVA were, nobody knows what strategic dynamism means. But I got a sense somehow these hedge fund guys wanted to turn UVA into a for-profit college, but I can't imagine a more disastrous idea. So do we think that's what they were going for? What were they going for here?
I mean, the emails were leaked saying they were.
I think that if you're not at a university, I think it is really hard to understand the context. But this is a really, really trying time for public universities. And in California, definitely. We are reinventing public education in this country and in the UC system every day. Taxpayers do not want to fund public education, and it's a tragedy because this just means there's going to be more income inequality in this country. So these public universities have to survive, and everybody is committed to that at the university. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they need to be for-profit corporations, but what has been placed upon us as faculty members and administrators is to raise our own money. And so if
Really?
Oh, absolutely.
Wait, as a professor, how in the world do you raise money? What do you do?
Well,
she sells T-shirts.
I break a great hot dog and I have a cart. No, I have done a lot of, lectures, and you go out, you're trying to engage donors and establish relationships with alums who may step up and want to fund a chair or fund research. But but the other
Canadian dollars are coming in heavy here. So.
The other way to do it is that you start programs. So you start a one-year master's program in political campaign management, or in winning words, or if you're in the English department, in comedic writing, or
No. We got to focus on this because I'm amazed by this. I didn't know this. I want to get to your thoughts on winning words, etc. But they have the professors go talk to donors for the university to do fundraising?
Dude, every day, yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
I'm a little devastated by that
Absolutely.
because there's something, I think, horribly wrong in that system.
We took pay cuts. There's no money for public education.
And the tragic irony of this happening at UVA is that that's Thomas Jefferson School. That's the university that he founded under the principle that all public education should be free to everybody. And our founding fathers, this is one of the things that we talk about at Winning Words Project, that we need to get back to the basics and reclaim our founding fathers, because they stood for progressive principles and they stood for public education. I only brought one thing written down because I knew I wouldn't be able to remember it by heart, but John Adams had this to say: laws for the liberal education of youth, especially the lower class of people, are so extremely wise and useful that to a human and generous mind, no expense for this purpose would be thought extravagant. And yet now, people don't want to pay for public education. And in California, that's because of then Governor Ronald Reagan, who had this to say, as opposed to John Adams: the state should not subsidize intellectual curiosity. I mean, how diametrically opposed is that?
In Texas, the GOP platform now says kids should not be encouraged to do critical thinking. Right. Literally, because they might disobey their parents.
Well, their goal is to get it to a point where only the rich get educated, and then you'll have workers.
Exactly.
No, that's exactly right. And so Mitt Romney talks about how his dad was a self-made man. Okay, that's good, that's great. But then not him, his dad was actually a pretty decent guy,
right.
But Mitt Romney wants to burn the bridge down after him. Like, we got here, we got our money, let's burn it. Look, it reminds me of my dad. My dad was literally in a small town/village on the southeastern border of Turkey. And there's no way he would have gotten out of there if their public education in Turkey wasn't free. He won his way into one of the best schools, just with an exam, no money, and here we are living the American dream because we got a chance. Otherwise, right now, I'm literally an olive farmer in Turkey. right?
Right.
And so to me, there's nothing more important than public education because it's the great equalizer. It puts us all on the same footing. But to Lee's point, maybe that's what they hate.
Yeah, they
is
don't.
what they hate.
They don't want the lower classes getting educated. Oh, it's a disaster.
It's not what the taxpayers of California hate. I think we should be clear. I think like average
no,
people.
I was meaning the hedge fund
You know,
guys.
they're
We're
just-
talking about the right way.
Yeah, they're just cash strapped, and so anything that is going to require more taxes, they're not going to be in support
Well,
of.
yes and no. So here's the situation. That goes back to our earlier conversation on framing, right? So if you had this conversation with the voters of California, I think we could win that fight, right?
I don't think. Well,
No,
we're
well,
going to
look-
find out in the fall because
Yeah.
it's going to come down to. We're going to find out.
You think we are? I don't think we are because I think that what happened in California is public education was destroyed by Prop 13.
Well, there's the governor's initiative. You know, he's going to put this thing out there that people are going to have to vote on, and if it doesn't pass, you know,
So the
I'm probably getting another pay cut.
So the taxpayers pay the trillions to bail out the banks, but can't cover education. It's beautiful.
So
Right.
this is where we give a shout out. Come to the Winning Words Project and we'll help you frame this issue so that it passes in California.
Okay, well, I hope so. I hope so. But look, you know, I think what happens, and then by the way, I want to be clear, not all hedge fund guys, Wall Street guys, rich guys are the
No.
bad. Of course not, right?
No.
But it's these specific guys.
98% max. Max.
It's these specific guys who are trying to turn great schools. The University of Virginia is one of the top 25 schools in the country. For private schools, you know, God bless, there's a lot of people who went to them who are great people who got a decent education, but largely it's a joke. Look, I'm going to keep it real. I mean, you look at the numbers here. Let me show you some of them here. In 2008, 22% of the first-time full-time degree-seeking students actually graduated for for-profit colleges, right? What they want to turn UVA into. Public institutions, 55, kicking their ass, right? Private institutions that are nonprofit, 65%. So their graduation rates are so much better, and you could do it in almost any category. These for-profit colleges don't care about educating the kids; they care about profit.
Profiting. And
There's one other thing I think we need to talk about on this profit question, because another thing that you get sort of well steeped in if you're at the university that is you probably have no experience with if you're not. One of the issues that was mentioned in this debacle were these small departments. And the president's unwillingness to cut the small departments, and he said, you know, like classics in German, and there are departments at the university that have very few majors but have very many faculty members, and if you are looking at this as a business, you know, why are we funding these departments that students do not want to be in? And I think that is a question that probably the trustees were asking. And you know, but there's political pressure not to cut some of these departments.
Okay, you want to know one of the most popular classes at Penn, Ivy League school, right? It's supposed to be a good school. Human sexuality. Okay, great. You leave it to the students; they're all going to go to the sex class, right? So I mean, we're supposed to give them an education. It's not supposed to be like, well, you know, how do you feel about?
And it's becoming all business, and they're cutting all the humanities, so they're all just learning
it's
how to.
It's actually not that at all. It's that the university, because it is mostly populated by liberals, feels like there have to be departments like women's studies and departments that advance liberal ideas. But students do not take those classes. They don't
You
have.
think so? I would imagine that on liberal campuses that those might be rather popular.
Students want to be political science majors. They want to be English majors. They want to be history majors because they think that's going to help them get a job, get into law school, get into
they'd be
medical
wrong
school.
about that, but.
So, but there's pressure from university leadership to keep these departments and to fund them because they advance liberal ideas. And that's when you get people that are sort of corporate America people who tend to be Republicans saying, you know, that's a waste of money. So there's a legitimate debate here about how to run a university.
Of course, there's a legitimate debate about how to run a university, but I don't think that there's a great debate about whether these great universities like the University of Virginia should turn around and say, classics. Who needs the classics? Let's do more business classes. I think that's ridiculous. And I went to business school for undergrad. So it's not that I don't appreciate business. You know, I run a business. But my favorite class, and even in high school, was humanities, where they taught us critical thinking. That was the most important class. You got that out of the education. What are you left with? A bunch of dummies. I mean, look, the reality is these hedge fund guys and Rector Dragus aren't that brilliant anyway. I mean, how bad an idea is it to take one of the top universities and turn it into a laughingstock?
Well, and you also look at why this happened. It's the Board of Trustees, which each governor gets to appoint, I think it's 5, so half of them. And so it's a Democratic governor and a Republican governor, so half of each. However, the problem is you got a Democratic governor who also is appointing corporate, very wealthy people. So the Board of Trustees becomes these corporate, very wealthy people. And so you need another side of it. People that are not just millionaires looking to, that's not their only worldview. You know, you need another view on this thing.
There are usually student members of boards of trustees, and there's usually a faculty member. They're voting members. But you're right, like, you know, this is an honor, and it's something that a governor does for someone who is a very well-established member of the community and probably a politically influential
Well-established
person.
means rich.
Yes, it does.
That was some good framing.
not just
Did you see
rich,
that
but-
framing?
Yeah.
Yeah, by the way, every single board member at the University of Virginia has contributed to a politician. So,
Except the student.
right,
Yeah.
except for the student,
Yeah.
right? So you don't even necessarily have to be rich, although they all happen to be rich enough to be able to give to a politician. But Lee, if you raised enough money and you gave it to a politician, you could buy your way onto that seat too. So
Again, comedian dollars coming in heavy.
yeah,
You know,
one day.
I just want to go back to where we started, though, with the money situation, right? When I think about the Board of Trustees at the universities I've been at, you know, one of the things that's really great right now is that as a UC faculty member, we can go to those trustees and say, you need to work your networks because we need to raise $100 million for 100 faculty chairs so that research can continue on this university. Can you guys help us do that? And they can. So it's a little bit of a, we just need balance, I think. But it's not
That
irrelevant.
doesn't sound like balance. It sounds like it's all about money.
No, but I mean, we need the other side as well. We need the students and the faculty and the community members to have a voice in the governance of the universities too.
Lynn, just one more thing. You mentioned earlier that you had these things that you would do to raise money.
Yeah.
What is it like? So, not talking to the donors, but the programs that you would run. What I don't know how that works.
Well, you might, you know, I'm in the political science department, and so we might start a program that is, you know, 36 credits, and you get a master's degree in campaign management or in framing, you know, strategy, electioneering. And we could decide to do that, and we'd staff it, and we'd have a curriculum, and we'd pay Jill to come in and teach a class, and but we'd charge people a lot of money to go through it, and that would be a
not the
moneymaker for us.
students, but people outside of the university.
Anybody who wanted a master's degree in campaign management or electioneering or something.
And then you turn master's degrees into a profit-making enterprise.
Yes, we would make a lot of money doing that, and I'm sure
Wow.
we're gonna do it. You know, because we are in a position where if we don't do that, we can't fund our graduate students who go on from UCLA to get jobs at Harvard, Stanford, Yale. You know, so we want to continue to do that.
But you look
All
at
right.
why you can't fund those things. It's because, again, we'll bail out banks, but we won't bail out education.
That's where we are.
All right, we'll leave it right there then. When we come back, we're going to discuss why the media concentrates so much on the trivial in terms of these elections. And I think that there's actually a very good reason why. We'll talk about it when we return. For our final point, we start with a photo instead of a video. It is a photo of Mitt Romney's former dog, Seamus. Now, he's become a bit of a legend because in 1983, they strapped him to the roof of a car as they were going from Boston to Canada. And people can't stop talking about it. Now, he was in a cage, but he also pooped all over the car. Lots of fun angles to this story. And media obsessed with it to the point where you'd think that Seamus was his VP. And the question that arises here as we look at Seamus is, and there he is, oh, and he's even there with kittens. Will you look at that? That doesn't seem to make sense, but nonetheless. So the question is, does the media focus too much on trivialities? Lynn, let's start with you.
I think there are two ways to look at this. What do you mean by too much? Right. So I think more now than ever because there is more news hole to fill. Right. You have to talk about something. So stuff like this is interesting. People want to watch stuff like this. So more than ever, yes. One of the most famous examples of something like this is Gerald Ford going down to San Antonio, Texas at a big rally, and they hand him a tamale and he bites right into it without shucking the tamale. And you know, everyone was like,
loser.
Come on.
I don't even know what that means.
Well, okay, you got to shuck your tamales. Like,
Okay.
Let's talk later.
That sounds kind of dirty, but okay.
They wrap them in corn husks.
So things like this happen. McGovern went to New York. He ordered a hot dog and a glass of milk. Okay, so some of these things seem trivial, but the argument that you might hear people make is that you can actually learn something about how much does this guy know about people like me. If you're a Latino living in San Antonio, obviously Gerald Ford knows nothing about your culture. He doesn't know about your foods. Same thing with McGovern. On the other hand, would it be more informative for people to learn this kind of information directly by covering policy and things like that? Yes, but the fact is, nobody would watch those shows. Those shows exist on PBS. Nobody watches them.
Well, a decent number of people watch PBS. I have a different theory, but I don't disagree with what you're saying. They are more entertaining. For example, Mitt Romney, there's 2 recent gaffe scandals. One was about donuts that he called chocolate goodies. Another one was about cookies that he thought were 7-Eleven cookies but were homemade. Oh, for Christ's sakes, who cares? Like, that doesn't tell you anything about Mitt Romney.
I think she's going far too easy on the American people. What is this, a nation of fucking children? Jesus Christ, the world is melting! All right? Stop talking about the dogs! Stop it! Turn off the stupid TV crap and pay attention! I feel like our country is going off a cliff. I mean, honestly, like, what do we have, 5-10 years before we could still turn around climate change? Like, it's going off a cliff, and everyone is looking out the back window of the car going, look at the sunset. Hey, look, there's a girl in a bikini.
There's a frickin' cliff, right? Okay, yes, I agree with you. But at the same time, to Lynn's point, Jill, look, people will say, hey, listen, you know what? Maybe it does give you some insight. Now, maybe the donut thing doesn't, the cookie thing doesn't, but he strapped his dog to a car. That seems really weird and possibly inhumane. For a 12-hour car ride, does that give you some insight into his character?
I guess it could, but is that the part of his character we want an insight into, really? Is he going to risk putting the nation's dogs on top of his car?
But if you're in the Romney campaign, you worry about these adding up, right? He says the cookies are from 7-Eleven, he straps his dog to the roof, he cuts the kid's hair off, and it all adds up to he's insensitive.
His wife owned a couple of Cadillacs.
Right, so he's rich.
See, I think that's a gaffe that matters.
Rich and insensitive.
Because he doesn't get you because he says, what, look, I buy American, I bought a couple of Cadillacs for my wife. Right. Like, so you get a sense maybe he doesn't understand your problems.
And he's
like
friends with the NASCAR owners.
I like the owners,
Right.
So, I mean, those kinds of things those seem like trivial moments, but they add up to a caricature of him that a lot of people will buy into, rich and sensitive.
Right. And look, and then you have John Kerry said Lambert Field instead of Lambeau Field in Green Bay. Oh my God, he's going to lose Wisconsin. Now, I love football. I can't believe he thought it was Lambert Field. But who cares? That doesn't give you any insight into him. But it just means he doesn't know football. So what?
In this next election, the dog vote is going to be big, all right? There's going to be a lot of dogs voting, and if they don't get purged from the rolls, Rick Scott wants to take them off. But
Right. No, I hear you. I hear the vote's going to be raining cats and dogs. Okay, fine. I'll leave the comedy to you. Okay. So now, I do have a different theory on why the media does this. It's not just because it's more entertaining and it's easier, etc., than trying to explain climate change, Social Security, whatever it might be. My theory is that if you get into substance, you're going to get into trouble if you're the media. Because if you explain Mitt Romney...
You got to do research.
Well, no. But it's not just that. They get accused of being biased if they actually give you the honest truth. So, for example, if you do an honest assessment of Mitt Romney's tax plan, you see that it cuts literally trillions of dollars in tax cuts for the rich. Now, if you point that out, the Republicans will scream bloody murder. CNN, what are you doing? How could you possibly say that? You're so biased. You're saying he's for the rich. But that's his tax plan. He's for the rich.
You're pointing to the other problem our media has, that they've always got to act like there's two sides to every story. So one guy is talking about the dog, how horrible is the dog trap. The other guy, now we have someone else here who says dogs are douchebags. Like, strap them to the car.
I think but it's not the job of a reporter to interpret you got to place it in context, but it is to report on, reflect what has happened. And I think that's sometimes where I traveled around with a bunch of reporters in Iowa and New Hampshire, and their jobs are really hard. I'm so glad. Their jobs are so much harder than mine. But
they do them. They're hard.
The thing is that the one thing they cannot do is write the same story every day. Mm-hmm. And guess what Mitt Romney and Barack Obama are doing? They're doing the same thing every day. They're going around to some small pizza ranch in Iowa and giving the same speech 10 times a day. But that guy writing for the New York Times, he can't write that story every day.
Here's
You
what I
say
would
that,
do.
but what was the research that said there's been 50 different columns by Gail Collins on the dog? They do write the same story every day.
Yes.
It's just on the trivialities, right? But do you see what I'm saying? That if they actually report the things in context, and look, they could do it for either side. President Obama, we did a story today on the Young Turks on Current, where we talked about how he killed Abdul Rahman al-Awlaki. That sounds really dangerous, right? He's a 16-year-old who's a U.S. citizen who was born and grew up in Denver, happened to be in Yemen, and his dad was, we declared a bad guy. We didn't prove that either. We never tried them. Executed the kid as well as the dad in 2 separate bombings, and we've never explained the bombings. Now look, we don't hear that either, right? And that's a real legitimate criticism of President Obama. But what happens if you say, how dare you say that about the president? You're biased. You're obviously on the Republican side. Whenever you get into substance, one of the two sides will scream bloody murder that you're biased if you present the facts.
And also, you might be scaring off your ratings, your demographic that wants to hear all Obama love or something like. It's become about ratings.
And so that's really interesting because CNN is scared of being called biased. MSNBC is scaring off the home team, right?
Right.
And Fox News,
Obviously.
same thing, right?
Yeah.
So like, oh my God, you'll lose ratings if you criticize Obama. Believe me, I know that's what they think. So that's why, you know what's safe? Seamus is safe. Oh, it's a dog
it's the
story.
safe
People
story.
like dogs. I'm not going to get in trouble for it at all. The donut story, the Lambert story, they're all so safe. Nobody accuses you of bias. It's just a safe story, and everybody has fun, and nobody learns a damn thing.
I'm just not so sure that I agree that they're all afraid of the bias because so much of our media is biased and they don't seem to care. They're unashamed by their bias. And it's one of the things I talked to my dad about this past weekend. He's a staunch conservative. And I have to remember when I'm talking to him and he's talking Fox News talking points that my dad grew up in an era where they had Walter Cronkite. He reported the actual news. So when he turns on the television and there's a news channel on, he expects it to be real news.
People still do that.
Yeah.
They just don't do it on cable.
Yeah, well, no, I hear you on that, and PBS does a pretty decent job, et cetera. But, you know, the flip side to that is Cronkite also, his most critical moment was when he gave his opinion that the Vietnam War wasn't working. And he swung the country in a sense, right? But he wasn't afraid to call it as it was.
Exactly.
Right? And right now, you're right, there's the Fox News and there's the perspective people like MSNBC and Current, where I work, and the Young Turks, which is the online show,
not,
et cetera.
not just cable, but print news as well. And
Right.
they don't seem to have any concern about telling the truth anymore. And actually, the Supreme Court, the same week they decided the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, they also decided that it was legal to lie. They had that case about the gentleman who pretended to be a service member or something. So they said it's legal to lie. You can lie all you want. And I think it was 7 days after that, op-ed person from the Wall Street Journal took an article from the Journal of American Medical Association and completely misrepresented it. And the authors actually wrote a response to him and said, you have completely misrepresented what we had to say because you are opposed to the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. And they just do it on purpose. They don't care about being seen as biased. They're biased and they want you to be as biased as they are, so they're going to talk you into their bias.
I think that goes to a slightly different point because I think the Supreme Court is so corporate controlled now that they're like, well, how do I give corporations an advantage? Well, I could let them lie. False advertising, false political advertising, which leads to more Republicans, which leads to more corporate profits, et cetera. So, but look, guys, one more question in this regard. If we gave the Americans public the truth and the details about Social Security and taxes, et cetera, do you think they would care?
Yes.
Do you think they would watch?
They wouldn't watch. They wouldn't watch. I mean, they can do that now.
That's ridiculous.
They can do that
and
now.
people are flooding to other
McNeil Lehrer?
alternative news sources and things. I think you could put research behind some of this stuff and actually give people a well-researched actual program on some of these
I
24-hour news cycles?
I don't know,
I
they're going to
think
want to
that-
watch research. I think that's one of the problems Democrats have is we're too wonky on statistics and research
So what
and all that
if
stuff.
what if we publish the actual news on the side boob photos? So people are clicking on them and they see on the side, you know, more prisoners in U.S. than anywhere else in the world.
Well, the White
like
House
that.
does this when the president gives speeches. You can, if you watch online, you can click on the sidebar and get more statistics and things. And I think we're just at this like sweet spot turning point in the history of news. And there's never going to be another Walter Cronkite.
Sweet spot?
Yeah, because it's going to get
farthest thing from a sweet
it's
spot
gonna
I've ever
get
seen in my
better.
whole life.
It's going to get better. It's going to get better. And this is sort of
Really?
a,
I didn't think
Really?
so.
yeah, it is. It is because what's happening at the same time as this sort of division of news into back to the partisan press, okay, is this sort of increase in people wanting numbers, and it's sort of a money ball. This money ball idea is really, you can see it in industry, you can see it in campaigning. People now want data, and I think that in 20 years, that's going to be a very natural thing for the average
I
consumer.
thought you just said all people want is dog stories.
Right now, this is what I'm saying. Like it's turning.
People
it's
are
turning.
changing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Look, of course, I'm the most biased man in America here on this issue because I think that they're going to turn to the Young Turks. Okay.
Of course they
No,
are.
but
Of course.
I
And
actually
this
mean
is the
that
moment.
literally.
Right, starts right now.
Right. Well, it's already started because we're the largest online news network. Not a big deal, though. Okay. All right.
Not breaking it all. No,
Right.
no, no, no.
No, but there's a real point to be made there, which is that, look, CNN's ratings drop, et cetera, because people think this is fake. This isn't giving me the real news. They turn to alternatives, as Lee was saying. Where do they go? They go online. And we're among the things that they find. Huffington Post does a great job. They not in like their starting video now, but in their news stories, et cetera. And by the way, they also do what you suggested, Lee, and we
Yeah.
do it too. They'll be like, here's a little side boob, here's a little Kim Kardashian. And by the way, did you know President Obama kills people in drone strikes and Mitt Romney's tax plan's a disaster? I mean, that's Young
It is
Turks.
kind of amazing to see them next to each other, like drone strikes killing Americans and kittens wearing hats.
Right. People often criticize
is.
Huffington Post for that. We don't. Honestly, the Young Turks does the same thing, right? So you give people what they want. We're not above the crowd, right? So we're willing, we entertain people because that's why people watch, right? But at the same time, while you're entertaining them, you can give them really important information about the country.
Okay, but let's just be clear that that you guys don't. There's no reporting here, right? It's not a news
Oh, now
program.
you're getting in my face.
Well,
That's,
you
so
know,
that's,
no, but
that's how you're gonna roll.
That, it's not to say anything about the value of it, but there's a difference between Walter Cronkite and the reporters on the evening news and a discussion like this.
Right. You're
and-
right. We do analysis. And we give
Right.
context and we
and
give perspective.
opinions, and,
Right.
and perspectives and opinions.
Please, it's perspective, not opinion. Okay.
Sorry, not a winning word, apparently. Not a I missed a memo on that. Okay.
Kidding. See, it's all in the framing, right?
There has to be a way forward for reporting. We do need that. And
Yes.
if it's not,
I think that I think that conversation is about setting up independent reporting like The Guardian does in the UK, where they're not dependent on corporate advertisers. Because if they are, you're in a world of trouble.
Right.
Eventually, you always do what the people are paying you to do. And if the corporations are paying you for the advertising, you're going to do exactly what they tell you to do.
This is the heart of the problem, is the fact that almost none of the news sources we get can go after corporations, which, what's more powerful than the corporations right now? And if you can't do reporting against them, that's 90% of what's important right now.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
No, that's exactly it. And that's why Archer Daniels Midland for years has given millions of dollars to the Sunday talk shows, even though they don't sell a thing to consumers. They want to make sure the Sunday talk shows don't talk about Archer Daniels Midland. Okay,
Right.
And that's how this game is played. All right, we of course want to know what you think as well. Do you think we focus too much on trivialities in the media overall? Do you think there's a way to fix it? And do you think Americans would care if you actually give them the substance of the policies? Looking forward to hearing what you guys say as well. Well, as you all know by now, we've had an awesome episode of The Point, and I want to thank everybody involved, Professor George Lakoff on his really interesting point about messaging, and then I want to thank student activist Seth Kay, who recently graduated from University of Virginia on that issue, and of course our panelists as well. So Jill Clausen, tell me a little bit about what's going to happen for you next. What's going on?
Well, we're just working on the winning words and talking about framing the issues that are important to people in this upcoming election, and we're talking to primarily just people like us. It's a lot of it is conversational. It's not entirely say this, don't say that. It's if you're having a conversation with your dad, who's a conservative, this is how you should talk to him about the things that are important to progressives and Democrats. And you can find us at winningwordsproject.com.
All right, great. Lee Camp is a political comedian. You've got Pepper Spray the Tears Away. That sounds pretty cool. What is it?
Thanks. That's the name of my new, that's my live comedy album, so it's an hour of my stand-up. But I also have a book out, Moment of Clarity, and the Moment of Clarity web series. I do 2 a week. People can get all that at leecamp.net. And if they want a free track from the album, just email pepperspraythetearsaway@gmail.com.
What a lib, giving away stuff for free.
I know.
No wonder
seriously.
you're not a Republican. All right, and Professor Vavrick the Maverick, what's coming up for you?
I'm going to give stuff away for free too. So, book on the 2012 election called The Gamble, which will be released as e-chapters free. You can get those at the Princeton University Press website. And I will be blogging on the election at Model Politics, which lives at yougov.com, yougov.com.
All right, thank you so much, guys. Great show. All right, we'll see you guys next time.